Hey gang, welcome to Big Brother and the Hodling Company, which is a podcast about music and Web3 and trying to fend off Big Brother. I'm a Geek Voice. Today I spoke with Maarten Walraven. Maarten has a PhD in history and works at the intersection of music and media. He is co-project lead for the Water and Music Academy, the co-editor of Music X, which is a newsletter on music tech, and is head of operations at Symphony.live, which is a streaming video platform created in collaboration with some of the world's leading symphonic orchestras. He also just started Wild Awake, which is a new music project focused on building scenes that uses Web3 technology. We discussed the importance of scenes and of composers and artists who grant creative license to others that create, as well as the correlation between music and identity and the importance of designing for deeper relationships in a world that still prioritizes the follower count. Hope you all enjoyed the conversation. Here we go. Hey Maarten, it's great to have you here.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So as always, I like to start at the beginning and just hear a little bit about where you grew up and when your relationship with music began.
It's interesting because I think everybody's relationship with music is always at the beginning, right?
I hope. Yeah, that's the hope.
I was just remembering earlier today that for my PhD, I read a lot of these working class autobiographies from people in England born the late 19th, early 20th century, and then written around the 30s of the 20th century. And they all have, most of them, like the vast majority of them, have a sound as their first memory. So it would be like clogs or a knocker-upper or something like that. And so, yeah, I think the first music is always special. But yeah, I think like for me, it just started when I was a teenager and started becoming a fan of things and going to parties and dancing and going to gigs, and music becomes this intrinsic part of your life that way.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Do you subscribe to the Cajun thought that everything we do is music?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Cool.
Yeah. Any sound can be music. Yeah.
Yeah. And what were these first musics that were bringing you to clubs that were around you, as a teenager? What were your first musical loves?
The kind of skate pop punk, Green Day, NoFX style music, which led into stuff like Nine Inch Nails.
Cool.
I was a lot into trip hop, Portishead, Massive Attack, all that sort of stuff. And then drum and bass, techno. Yeah. And then it just got weirder and weirder.
That's amazing. I love it. I think we share, at least of what you've mentioned, a pretty similar sonic palette. Yeah, and Portishead and Nine Inch Nails were two of my early music loves as well. And like you, I think it just continued to get weirder from there. At what point did that love for music and your interest in music translate into an interest in pursuing it in more of a professional capacity?
So I guess because I never learned to play an instrument, I never had the discipline to actually learn something properly. I started learning probably about 8 different instruments, but I never really got to grips with any of them. But I did want to do stuff with music, so I started working in venues and festivals and that sort of stuff. And then while at university, I realized you could also write about music and think about music and think about the impact that music has on society and on people. Yeah, so then that started then.
And what was your first foray into that? You studied history. That was the focus of your PhD, right?
Yeah, I did a PhD in history in the end, but I started with what you would call cultural studies. And I wrote essays about sort of music and diaspora communities, music and sort of identity, a lot about music and identity. My bachelor's thesis was on noise and identity. And then, yeah, that was the first things. And then I got really into philosophy and ethics and, yeah, the whole identity question and just how music works, basically, which is, of course, the title of a book by David Byrne as well.
Yeah,
But sort of, yeah, those questions I found very intriguing. Like, how do you, like, music is organized sound? What does that mean? And we listen to a lot of music, and we identify with certain musics as well, but we never really make anything out of that. And that's probably because the sound is just ephemeral. It just disappears. So it doesn't have lasting value in that sense. So yeah, that was the sort of thing that I was really interested in, and that I was eager to explore from a very philosophical perspective.
Yeah.
And then later on, I veered away from that, because if you want to properly study music, then you need to understand the notes, and I don't understand the notes. Tried again to learn, but I failed. Then during my PhD, the first idea was like how street musicians organized the way that people moved around sort of urban areas in rapidly industrializing cities.
Cool.
But then, as historians do, you go to the archive and you find many different things than the thing you set out to find. So it became much broader, and it just became about sound more generally, not just the music of street musicians.
Yeah. What was your thesis when you first started to explore the intersection of music and identity, or sound and identity, or as you studied with your bachelor's, initially noise? And I'm curious how that evolved. I imagine there's an element to that when you're out to follow street musicians in urban areas, that where something like identity plays a huge role in the makeup of that. I'm curious to hear how your thesis kind of originated and how it evolved over time.
In the beginning, I was very interested in, when I was writing my bachelor's thesis on noise and identity, it was about how do people use this music that looks for sonic boundaries to identify themselves as people who are boundary pushing. They themselves also must think of themselves as these people who sit on the edges of society. And how does that then express itself in the music again? And that sort of gave me the, how do you say this? That sort of gave me the notion of understanding that connection between music as sound as music, and the way that people construct the world that they live in. And then I became more interested in finding expressions of that in the physical world. And a lot of this stuff happens in cities. So yeah, that and then history led me into I was just intrigued by these songs that I found, which were ways to tell news. Just how news spread through songs in centuries ago and up to the 19th century. If something happened I studied Britain and Germany, so if something happened in like London or maybe in Munich or something, then people would write a song about it, and it would travel up to Manchester, or it would travel up to like Dusseldorf or something, and it would find its way much, much later, and people would be singing about something that happened a long time ago. But yeah, the way that these street musicians, whether they were realizing this or not, played into a lot of things, right? So if they were singing songs to sell things, for example, if people were singing songs to sell tomatoes, they would use rounder words that make round sounds, which would then trigger people to go, oh, I want that thing. This all becomes very neurological. But yeah, I try to create connections like that.
Oh, it's amazing. I'm curious if you see that still happening today. Obviously, the industry is completely different, and there is, I don't know how many more times more music at this point, that it's really hard to kind of trace things like that. I'm curious if your study extended to the Spotify age of music, and if you still see those like neurological tendencies of, if you have something to sell or talk about, matching the physiology with the actual music itself, or using it as a way to disseminate news, for instance, or like any semblance of those things today.
Yeah, for sure, it still happens. It's just very different. Also, but the way that music spreads now is so different, and the way that we consume music is so different, because there was barely recorded music in the late 19th century, and now we're all walking around with headphones. creating our own little sonic worlds. And it's more about things like the role that music plays in the way that people drive. And the sonic environment of a car, for example, is super interesting. And a lot of music has been made to accompany that sort of environment. So that definitely still happens, just different.
Yeah, 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 absolutely. Yeah, and I'm really attracted to that idea also that you were talking about of these people who embodied the music that they were creating as a boundary pushing kind of art form, and vice versa. There was like a symbiosis between those, or like between that relationship of the person making it and the output. And that was always, when I wrote for Vice, that was always my beat, was writing about the weird avant-garde experimentalists who were out doing crazy shit that's hard to actually define as music in some ways, and that's the point. Like I remember there's what's coming to mind right now is like a piece by Alvin Lucier when he plugged like these kind of nodes to his brain and tracked the alpha waves that came out of his brain, and that dictated like a drum beat. Just like weird conceptual things, and it's not really about the sonic output. It's more about like the why the hell are you doing this? What does that mean?
Yeah, and a lot of them went a little bit too far, which made it not very pleasant to listen to for
Right.
most people, which is also fine, of course. Not all music needs to be a pleasant melody. But yeah, a lot of composers went a little bit too far. And then there's also the kind of counter urge again, of course, of people like Baird, the Eastern European sort of late 20th century composers who made very beautiful melodic music again, which was much nicer than a lot of the weird stuff that was happening, which may sound cool conceptually, but
right. Yeah, I feel like the true value of a lot of the stuff that didn't sound good, wasn't melodic or even have harmony really, was interesting because it inspired other people who were making more popular music to think slightly further and make their music more interesting and expand the kind of the mainstream notion of what music can be. And
yeah,
that,
for sure. Like with just synthesizers, even
sure.
that also happened. So
yeah, or like Lamont Young working with the Velvet Underground or something, and
yeah,
like, being able to trace that all the way through music. It's we owe those conceptualists a debt because they ultimately, I think, they make music more interesting.
yeah, for sure. If that sort of influence hadn't happened, then the Stooges would have sounded way different. Silly things like that. That's cool to trace that sort of stuff.
Totally. And yeah, bearing that in mind and returning, I guess, to contemporary times, I did an interview with Glenn Bronco once, and we were hanging out at this cafe, and he told me how there are no more movements. This was like 2013 and 2014. And he was convinced that we've reached a stasis and nothing interesting happens anymore. Like an old man yells at clouds in a sort of perspective in some ways, but it's interesting to think about, and I'm curious to get your thoughts on what that kind of conceptual art looks like today in music. Is it happening at all? And if so, where is that happening?
I want to say that's definitely still happening. And it probably is. The question nowadays, of course, is also who is listening, right? Because there is so much out there. We all know the numbers, right? 100,000 new tracks uploaded to Spotify every day.
Yeah.
Music Business Worldwide just came out a few days ago saying most of the music on streaming services now has been released after 2020.
Yeah, so that.
Just all these kinds of insane stats about music. You have all these apps that make it really easy for people to make music. And if you think about something like BandLab, like more than 10 million projects are started on BandLab every month. Yeah, there's so much music. That period that we're talking about is very much about everybody can do this, right? So it's the punk era. It's people like the Velvet Underground who drew on people who might not necessarily have been the best at their sort of art, but they were very good at bonding it together in different ways and creating something that had a lot of impact on people. And now it is seemingly a lot easier to find that sort of scene because you have the internet and you can connect to everybody across the world. So if you like a certain style of music and you live in Uruguay, then you can connect with the person who likes that silly kind of music and who lives in Thailand and who lives in New Zealand, and you can create a forum online and you can hang out and you can connect about the music. At the same time, it's much more difficult because there is an overload of information. There's so much stuff that you can consume that you might miss very easily what you would want.
Right.
And there's another interesting thing there, I think, in the sense that we've gone through very Western dominated music. And now we've suddenly gone from like reggaeton to Afro beats, and I'm waiting for the next sort of number one hit to be a Punjabi hit song that's going to be number one in 100 countries across the world. So you see that sort of spreading out. So maybe that's the new thing, right?
Yeah.
The new thing is just, okay, the canonical way of thinking about Western music is maybe boring, but there's a lot of other influences that we can draw on.
It's the globalization of everything coalescing and being able to borrow from anything instantaneously and recreate and remix in kind of infinite ways really easily. And then, of course, one of the issues with having 100,000 songs uploaded to Spotify every day is that maybe we're missing the newest stuff and the most interesting stuff. And it's really, but yeah, this seems like a good segue, I think, in terms of talking about scenes, to discuss your new project, which I'm really excited to hear about. So if you want to introduce Wild Awake, would love to hear more about what you're doing.
Wild Awake is a kind of experiment in scene building using Web3 blockchain technologies. And this is so I'm doing this together with Jamie, who's also known as Sound of Fractures. He's an artist. He started his kind of Web3 journey just over a year ago with his first NFTs, and is quite successful as a Web3 artist, but is also quite successful as a Web2 artist, as in his streams are doing okay and all that sort of stuff. So he's one of those people who's combining that very well. Another example would be, for example, Excelencia, who's a Puerto Rican artist. So there are definitely good examples of people who are able to combine the streaming economy with this new NFT economy. And a lot in this kind of ecosystem, this Web3 ecosystem, is about the success of a few people. And we think, like Jamie and I think, that it's very important to build a community and to do things together instead of doing them by yourself. And we just wanted to put our money where our mouth is and see if we can actually do this thing. So we take inspiration from culturally relevant labels like Warp Records, Young Turks, Ninja Tune, but also Web3 communities like Wave World or Future Surf, and see if we can take a music that's not super popular on the blockchain yet, which is alternative electronic music, which sits very closely, of course, to what Jamie makes, the Sound of Fractures, and is a music that I love as well. So we found sort of 5 artists, and we're working with a platform called Token Tracks, and it's great because they're supporting us in doing this, because they also feel the same way about what's needed for music in Web3 right now, which is that we need more interesting places for people to find a home. So we're creating the first digital home for Wild Awake on Token Tracks, and allowing sort of these 5 artists that we have to go in and experience what it's like to mint an NFT and do this together, being helped along the way by people who have done it before or been around and have a lot of experience with this sort of stuff. And in doing that, we have a sonic identity, cool people with great stories. Like, all of the artists involved have wonderful stories because each artist, of course, has a story, right? And that's what will resonate with listeners. And yeah, that's the gist of it. We want to see if we can create something a bit different that is about music, that is about culture, that is less about the pure financialization aspect that blockchain often brings with it, and is more about community building aspects that sort of is more like Web3 related. And yeah, see if we can make viable alternatives for artists who are building their careers and pursuing their dream of becoming people who can live off their music.
Cool. That sounds really exciting. As I have my own concerns about the over financialization of what's happening in music in Web3, I think. And the more we can lean into community scenes like this, I think the healthier. So that's incredible. I'm really happy to hear you're doing that. So are these artists that you're onboarding, are they people who have some familiarity with the Web3 space, or are they all coming from outside of it?
They have some familiarity with crypto, some of them. But out of the 5, we had to help 3 create a wallet, which it didn't have yet, and help them get their ENS, which is also their first NFT, and yeah, just help them along in that way. They all were familiar with it, so we found them through the kind of Web3 grapevine. Another person who's involved is Kat Bassett from
Nice.
Water Music. She's also helping out, and one of the artists that she mentors, coaches, not quite sure what they call it, via She Said So, is now also in the Wild Awake cohort.
Oh,
She's called Iris
cool.
L. So this is somebody who's been hearing about all of this stuff, but hasn't really had the experience of doing it. And then you have the person who is, yeah, I've done some crypto trading in the past couple of years during the bull market, but I don't actually have any NFTs or thought about releasing my music as an NFT, but always thought it might be interesting to do. So yeah, it's an interesting dynamic. But we really wanted it to be people for who it was going to be their first sort of actual music on the blockchain.
So it sounds like it's going to be cohort based. Yeah. This is an initial cohort.
Yeah. And so we're starting this with these 5 people on token tracks. There'll be limited edition NFTs. There's probably going to be 12 of them, relatively good, solid price of 0.02 ETH is what we're thinking about right now. So that the artist steps away with about $400, which is just a nice amount of money to walk away with from such a project. It's not the moon, but that's also not realistic for most people. And that's one of the things we try to do is like, how does this become this realistic, viable, extra, to put it in annoying terms, vertical for people for their revenue from their music? And how does that sort of fit into the narrative that they're weaving about themselves as musicians? Yeah, that's just where that train of thought went.
Cool. And I'm curious how you're approaching, because I think like what you were alluding to at the beginning and this kind of crossover between like a Web2 audience and a Web3 community, if you want to call it, and use those terms to differentiate. I'm curious how you're approaching that, what success will look like to build a community. That's always something that I'm really curious about because it is the most, I think, integral thing an artist or really anyone can do is have community, build community. Web3 and tools connected to the blockchain and these ways that people are using to organize collectively are incredibly fascinating. But something like community is also has to be a very organic process in order to manifest. And I'm curious how you're approaching this cohort and what the process actually looks like what's the strategy for helping artists to build community? What does that success ultimately look like? And if you have any thoughts on how you think that will happen.
Just to come back to the thing about cohorts as well. What we're trying to do is we're gonna bring these 5 artists on chain, and that's a first step for Wild Awake. So we want to see if we can build this brand around Wild Awake. We should probably call it a meme in Web3, right? But that will extend beyond that. So it'll be about the good music, but it will evolve into something that includes visual art, that includes graphics, that includes writing. That becomes much more of a cultural thing. But that always started with the music, and it will always be about this music, and that will always have this sonic identity that people will know. Okay, so if this has the Wild Awake stamp on it, then I know exactly what to expect, basically. Which is what all the great labels do as well, of course. Yeah, so one of the cool things about token tracks is that they already do the whole fiat thing, right? So you can pay in dollars if you want. And so one of the things that I hope is that some of these artists will find a couple of, maybe just one or two people from their own existing community, fan base, whatever you want to call it, where they have, where so they can find these people who will pay sort of 30, 50, 40, $50 for their music. Because that's, you and I both don't like the full financialization of that the blockchain brings with it. But one of the great things, of course, that happened is that the whole NFT craze has reevaluated the way that we value music and what we value about music, right?
Absolutely.
And I think we should try and keep hold of that. Don't make things so cheap that it becomes like a stream, basically, but make sure that it stays this thing that creates this value.
Yeah, it feels to have this new offering that with it comes some more intimacy and more closer engagement with an artist. It's a natural way to segment your audience, community, fan base, again, whatever term you want to use, in a way that you can't in a place like Spotify, where everybody, it's like a one size fits all. Everybody's pays the same price regardless of behavior. If I spend 20 minutes listening, in a month, I pay $9.99 a month. And if you spend 200 hours listening a month, you pay $9.99 a month. And we need ways to create tiers and segmentation for artists to be able to tap into that, given the absence of any other kind of financial model that they can tap into. I think it's a fine line between being averse, or at least cautious about the over financialization that's happening in this space, but also not making not making money a dirty word for musicians. They're not making any money, and they need to, just like other human beings.
Yeah, and they're all caught in the creator economy of having to be present everywhere and
Right.
publishing everywhere and creating
Yeah.
content for everything. And to me, this is still one of the super strengths of the blockchain, right? It's the provenance, the fact that you can own the stuff that you put out, which again is why it's important to use platforms that allow artists to have their own contracts, which is another thing that we have with token tracks. So you need to think about where you do things and how you do them. And one of the beauties of crypto or blockchain is that it allows you to take control of all of that. One thing that I often say to people is, if you do this, you can set your own metrics for success, right? Which we're also asking about. And you don't have to be going, oh, I have this many streams, I have this many followers, I have this many likes, I have this many something, that other people provide you as data points. But you can say, okay, so I want to have my metric for success is something totally different. It's I want to find 4 people that can help me release my music in India. I don't know. You can think of the weirdest things that you might want to achieve and then try and manifest that and make that happen, instead of saying, oh, to make that happen, I need 100,000 followers.
Yeah, no, I really like that idea. You can set your own success. You can set your own success metrics, and you have the tools available to you to customize it in any way that you want. Yeah, I'm curious how you and Jamie first connected, and how this came to be.
Jamie is also in What For Music, and I'm in What For Music. So we're members, and we're in the Discord, and we're active in the Discord. And then Jamie posted like, hey, I'm releasing my music as an NFT, and I listened to the music and I liked it, so bought it. And as was often the case, that was as much about supporting the artist as liking the music. A lot of times for me, it was all about, do I like the music, but also, do I like this person? Do I like their story? Do I like the way where they sit in the kind of cultural sphere around Web3 music? And yeah, then because my Twitter is connected to my ENS, Jamie was able to find out that I exist and DM'd me, and joined his little community. So that's how we started to talk. And yeah, he reads my newsletter. I listen to his music. Just found out that a lot of stuff that sort of he does influenced what I write about, and what I write about influenced the way that he approaches stuff like community. Yeah. And then at some point we were like, we got to do something together. And then we got the opportunity to do it.
Here we are. Cool. Yeah, it's a great story of all of these various Web3 music communities just overlapping and exposing people to like minds who have similar intentions, just coming together and creating something together. I mean,
and this is also why I don't think it's going to scale so fast. It's all like this. I know that a lot of people are working really hard to create more mass adoption.
Yeah.
Even the Ethereum Foundation's last sort of grant thing is about let's reach the next billion.
Yeah.
Do you have the first billion yet? I'm sure that it's going to happen, and something will be created that will be a lot more frictionless and will allow people to do that. And I think NFT ticketing is a great example of that, for example. But the stuff that we're doing doesn't really scale because it's all about human connections, and you can't have that many of them. And
you're not supposed to have 100 million friends.
Yeah, it's insane.
Yeah.
So if you can get together, if you can get 12 people together, then you're in a fast track. And then if you have, there's this guy called C.Y. Lee, and he says, if you get 3 people together, you have everything you need. You have somebody who can speak, somebody who can listen, and somebody who can react. And that's how I look at it as well. It's like you don't have to think big. You can think small and have success like that. And that's what this whole blockchain stuff is about for me, creating those kinds of connections. And that just doesn't scale very well. But it can be very big though.
Totally. I'm all for putting scale into the back burner and focusing on creating really strong, intimate communities. So cool. I'm for it.
Awesome.
Yeah, that actually reminds me. I saw Jamie post something. I think it was to Lens, which for those people listening who don't know what Lens is, it's a decentralized social graph on top of which people are building social networks. And he posted something about how he had shared 2 pieces of content. One was something he considered to be throwaway, just like a quick music thing that he created. And then one was this like very thoughtful piece that he had started that was based on his, I think, newborn daughter's heartbeat, I believe.
Oh.
Yeah, and made a song out of that. And he talked about how the first kind of throwaway thing that he didn't put any thought into was very superficial, got a lot more engagement than the one that he put all this time in with something as meaningful as like his child's heartbeat. And that also being a testament to the issue of scale, where there is very little time. Things aren't designed to be engaged with in really deep, meaningful ways. And I worry that if we create everything in the same image of before, we're not going to make any progress. We're just going to create the same thing again.
Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts about that, but I think I have a different example from my own experience, right? So if I write Music X and I've been working on it for weeks and it's like a great argument, it's also a finished argument, right? So I put that out into the world and I don't actually get that much responses to it. Whereas if I'm busy writing Music X and I suddenly read something that, I don't know, for example, upsets me, and I delete what I wrote, or I don't delete it, I put it somewhere else for future use, and then I just go on a rant, there's tons of engagement on that.
Yeah.
But I also think that's because it's open, right? It's more open-ended. You can't expect many people to sit down and take the time to engage with whatever it is that you put out into the world. And if you do, and it's this kind of more thought out, finished product, basically, then it's much more easy for people to accept that and move on. Whereas if it's this kind of more open-ended thing or something that they can put something of themselves into, it's much easier for people to engage with it. It takes less energy, right? So yeah, I think there's a lot in that. And there's a lot of value in creating spaces where people do engage more thoughtfully with each other.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. And that's something I experience a lot too in writing 1,500 word piece or something, and it can get less engagement than a 20-word tweet that
the
I write.
1,500 word piece of writing might be more evergreen. You find people referencing it 2 years from now. So
Yeah,
there's
totally.
staying power in that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's a place for both of these types of content. And yeah, I guess my hope is that in hopefully championing projects, Wild Awake and others that are oriented around these like more tight-knit, intimate kind of community building experiences, there's more time. There are more things designed for that kind of deeper engagement than just, for instance, on Twitter, everything's on level ground. I can tweet music NFTs are awesome, and I see these types of tweets a lot, and they'll have 200 likes for some reason, and then a piece, like really thoughtful piece that probably took someone 12 hours to write, 1 like. So they're all right next to each other, and they're all condensed into these 140 character snippets. And I wonder if there are ways that we can design to encourage deeper engagement in these types of social spaces.
If you like, my favorite record of 2022 was a record by Catherine Joseph, which is beautiful music. Everybody should listen to it, but it's also melancholy, sad. It's music that you can't just listen to. It grabs you and stops you from doing whatever it is that you're doing and makes you listen to the music. So you can't always listen to it, which means that it didn't pop up in my Spotify Wrapped because I didn't listen to it a million times, but I listened to it very intentionally if I did listen to it. So we have this disconnect there at the moment where we say, this is the stuff that you liked because it's the stuff you listen to most. But earlier we were talking about like Alvin Lucier and those kinds of people, right?
Mm.
It's also not usually the music that you just, okay,
Yeah.
don't know what to do. I'm going to put on Alvin Lucier.
Yeah.
No, you're probably going, okay, so now I want to have this music because of X, Y, and Z reason. But that music is super valuable, right?
No, absolutely.
That's probably the music you want people to find.
Right.
However many years from now.
Right. Indeed. That's actually the perfect segue into my last question for you. You're going to a desert island and you get to bring 3 albums with you. What are they?
3.
3.
That's luxurious. I'll take Live Evil by Miles Davis.
Nice.
And I'll take The Downward Spiral by 9 Inch Nails.
Cool.
And I will bring something that will make me jump up and down. I'll bring another album that makes me jump up and down. That's happy, and that's, yeah. I can't think of which one.
That's okay. To be determined.
Sorry?
I said that's okay. To be determined.
Yeah.
we can revisit that for round 2, whenever that may be, sometime down the road. Cool. Okay. And so, yeah, Maarten, for anybody listening who might be interested in getting involved with your projects or just following what you do, where is a good place for people to do that?
Can read my newsletter, which is called musicx.substack.com or musicx.email if you like nicer looking URLs. And you follow me on Twitter at Walraven Maarten. Yeah, I'm there. And if you want to know more about Wild Awake, track our mirror. So wildawake.mirror.xyz.
Cool. Awesome. Well, go check out everything that Maarten is doing. They're all great projects. And yeah, Maarten, this has been a really great conversation. Thanks. Really appreciate you being here.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Take care. All right, that's it for this episode of Big Brother and the Hodling Company. I'm your host, McKeegan Voice, and you can keep up with me and all the latest Web3 music trends on Twitter at McKeegan. That's MACEAGON. This show is a production of Decential Media, and you can visit us at Decential.io, and remember, only you can prevent and fend off Big Brother.